Hi, I'm Ameriie, and this is the New York Times By the Book tag. This tag was created by Marie Berg, and I was tagged by one of my favorite booktubers, David of ThePoptimist. Without further ado, here we go. The first question is, what's on my book stand right now? I am currently reading and loving Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. It's a wonderful fantasy set in the same world as the Grisha trilogy. It's been pitched as Ocean's 11 meets Game of Thrones, but I feel it's more Ocean's 11 meets Peaky Blinders. That show is incredible. If you guys haven't seen Peaky Blinders, do yourself a favor and go watch. Also, I've been dipping into Books of Blood by Clive Barker. This is a short story collection and it is incredible. It has all 3 volumes, volumes 1 to 3. I love reading them at night because it's so quiet and dark and the stories are so horrific. It's a lot of gore, but in a way it's very honest because you read a lot of books that have violence and someone's stabbed and it's clean. And violence is not clean. Violence is not really badass, clean, and quick. Violence, especially when it involves swords or knives, is very bloody and messy and actually kind of slow and gory. And I'm not saying that we need to have all of that gore, but books like Books of Blood and Marlon James's A Brief History of 7 Killings really stays true to what violence is, and I can appreciate that because it's honest. That said, I cannot read more than 2 stories at once because it's just like way too much gore and creative gore. It's always sex and death. Sex and death go hand in hand in so many of his stories. We'll talk about that later when I'm wrapping this up. This is on my nightstand and I do love to read this at night. Number 2, what was the last truly great book that you read? Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Read this. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It's fantastic. You can see I still have my tabs here. I talked about it at length in one of my booktubeathon videos, so if you want to know more about how I felt about it, check that out. Love this. A must read. If you could meet any writer, dead or alive, who would you want to meet and what would you want to know? Shakespeare. And I'd arrive extra early so I could see how many people walk through the door. After we got a few of those questions out the way, I think I just want to hang out and go to his stomping grounds and see what he liked to do and kind of like chill. See if he's into sports, you know, just hang out. Get to know the man behind the writer. What books on my shelves might surprise you? Well, I'm really into esoteric things. I love hidden knowledge, a lot of the things that people don't really talk about, things that you'll never learn in school, like sacred geometry, the truth behind the history that you're fed. One of my biggest passions has always been finding out the truth. Whatever the truth is about anything, especially when it comes to history and symbolism and how civilizations through time control information and control perception. One of my more tame books on that subject is Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World by Gerald Massey. Part of why I love Egypt is because I used to want to be an Egyptologist when I grew up. I mean, I wanted to be a lot of things when I grew up, but Egyptologist was one of them. Another reason why I love Egypt is because so many of the things that we credit now to Romans and Greeks were first created by the Egyptians. So that's a whole other thing that we're talking about when we want to talk about knowledge. If you ever want to learn the truth, you have to seek it for yourself. Information is power and power is never given. This book just shows how a lot of Judeo-Christian religion and a lot of things that we believe come from Egyptian beliefs. And going back even further than that. We can talk about this thing all day, but we'll leave it at that. How do you organize your personal library? Okay, I'm going to read this because I wrote it down because I didn't want to leave anything out, and I think I probably did still leave some things out. I have a YA section and an adult section. In the YA section, I divide it by hardcover and paperbacks, but I also divide it by genre. So contemporary, thrillers, magical realism, fantasy, sci-fi fantasy I kind of put together. And then in those categories, I also categorize by size because I need them to be aesthetically pleasing to my eye. And in the adult section, I separate by hardcover and paperback, and then I also have a classic section. Most of my classics are paperback, so it's not too hard to decide if I want to put it in the hardcover section or the paperback section. That would be a headache. You have to figure out where would it really go. I have a pretty big nonfiction section. I have spirituality, history, science, biography, the arts, esoteric knowledge, business, astrology, health, writing and screenwriting. What else? A Korean fiction section, which is comprised of books written in Korean, and then I have a Korean language section, which is like Korean language workbooks, things from university, other textbooks I picked up along the way. Oh, and I also have an ARC collection, and for all of the advanced readers copies, I have that. What book have I been meaning to read but I haven't gotten around to yet, and what book am I embarrassed about not having read? I have 2 books for the first part of that question, one of them being The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. I keep meaning to get to this, I loved Freedom so much, it just keeps sliding down my TBR. But I'm on top of it. I'm reading this year. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I've been meaning to get to this for 3 or 4 years now, and it just hasn't happened. I can't even say that I'll get to this year. Wait, can I say that? No. I want to get to this year, but there are so many books that I definitely know I need to read. I don't know if this is a absolutely this year, this will be done read, but we'll see. And I guess I'm kind of embarrassed about not having read Jane Austen. I have read Jane Austen before, but this was like in high school, and I can't really remember her stories. I mean, the movies have overtaken my memory of the literary works, so I kind of don't count them as being read. But I do want to have some kind of like Jane Austen, I don't know, personal little readathon or something. Maybe I'll read one every other month. We'll see. Disappointed, overrated, or just not good, a book that I read that I didn't like, that I guess I was supposed to like. And the second part of that question is, what's the last book that I DNF'd? The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. I know this one got so much praise. I actually stopped reading around page 115. If I remember correctly, this is about a magical British Secret Service. And I was enjoying it. The only thing that kind of kept pulling me out of the story so much that I just couldn't really continue is that although this is supposed to take place in England, the language used and the way that the main character was speaking, because it's in first person perspective, was so American. I'm not British, but London is like a second home to me, and I pay attention to the way people speak because that's something that I love. Cadences of language and the words used, context, all of those things. And so this felt so incredibly American to me, I just couldn't get past it. I do want to give it another try though, because I feel like the concept is really great and I liked the humor, and it was fast paced if I remember correctly. So I probably will give this another try. It was just that whole thing with the language that threw me out of it. My last DNF, I told you about that in my last video, my March book haul. Look Who's Back by Timur Vermes. I enjoyed the concept, but the pacing was a little too slow for my taste. What kind of stories am I drawn to? What do I stay clear of? I am equal opportunity when it comes to books. Nonfiction, fiction, literary fiction, sci-fi, fantasy. Well, now that you mention it, I don't read romance. I love books that have a romantic element, but not when romance is the main plot. But yeah, speaking of which, I know some people who only read literary fiction, which is a genre, by the way, because it's a style of writing. When you read a lot of literary fiction, you can see there are conventions there. But I always have to chuckle to myself when people are like, I only read literary fiction, I definitely don't read science fiction or fantasy, or I definitely don't read any kind of genre within the YA category because it's not good or it lacks depth or I find it a waste of time. And I have to chuckle to myself because I know friends who only read nonfiction and they find fiction, literary or otherwise, a waste of time. They're just like, why are you reading about made-up stories when you could read about things that are actually happening and you could actually learn something? I don't feel that way. I feel like you can learn things from reading all kinds of works. So it's funny to me how people who only read literary may turn up their nose at anything outside of that. And then you have people who read nonfiction who turn their nose at people who read fiction in general. Because it's all made up. At the end of the day, it's all made up. Because it's all made up. At the end of the day, it's all made up. That's just my little 2 cents on that. So essentially, when it comes to what I want to read, I just don't want to be bored. Just don't bore me. That's whether I'm reading a book on science or history, a biography or an autobiography or literary fiction or science fiction or fantasy. Just don't bore me. That said, I also appreciate theme. Even if I'm reading something that's fast-paced, science fiction or fantasy, I still need the story to transcend what's happening plot-wise. Like, it has to speak to something deeper. If you could require the president to read one book, what would it be? The Prince by Machiavelli. It just keeps it real. What do I plan to read next? Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I'm doing this as a buddy read-along with Victoria at A Hermit's Progress, and I'm so looking forward to it because I've heard nothing but great things about this book. Plus, I want to read The Goldfinch, and I wanted to read this one first. Doomed to Repeat: The Lessons of History We Failed to Learn by Bill Fawcett. The title pretty much says it all. Terrorism to inflation and recession and how that influences what happens not only economically, but how it affects the social climate. What really ended the Great Depression and whether it could work today. What history predicts for the final results of the Arab Spring, swine flu, bird flu, and the chances of another worldwide plague. My kind of book. When We Collided by Ameriie Lord. I'm really looking forward to this. I believe this was part of my most anticipated books of 2016. I've heard it's a great depiction of mental illness, and there's a bit of romance in here as well, and the prose has been repeatedly praised, so I'm really looking forward to this. So that was my New York Times by the book tag. I tag everyone because I think this is a really cool tag. So happy that Marie Berg created this tag, and so happy that David at ThePoptimist tagged me. If you want to answer these questions, feel free to put your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Please share the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Until later, I will see you next time. Bye! Wink Poppy Midnight by April Genevieve Tuholk. As you remember, this was one of my most anticipated reads of 2016, and it did not disappoint. I am not going to go into the synopsis of this book because this is truly one of the books that you should go into as blindly as possible.